There is a place in the American Midwest where the ground itself tells a story, not in rock formations shaped by wind and water, not in the fossilized remains of creatures long extinct, but in massive earthen walls, deliberately shaped, precisely measured, and aligned with a mathematical accuracy that should not have been possible 2,000 years ago. Ohio. Most people think of Ohio as flyover country, cornfields, football, a state you pass through on your way somewhere else. But beneath the surface of that ordinary landscape, and in some cases still visible above it, lies the evidence of one of the most sophisticated civilizations that ever existed in North America. A civilization with no name that we know of. A civilization that built structures larger than anything in the ancient world. A civilization that mapped the moon with a precision that modern astrophysicists have confirmed is accurate to within a fraction of a degree. And a civilization that vanished completely, mysteriously, and without obvious explanation around 500 AD. My name is Paul, and this is Mr. Origins. Today we go somewhere most ancient history documentaries never take you. Not Egypt, not Mesopotamia, not the jungles of Central America. We go to Ohio. And what you're about to learn will change the way you think about the ancient world and about the place you call home. To understand what we're dealing with, we need to set the stage. The year is approximately 200 BC. In the Mediterranean, the Roman Republic is expanding across southern Europe. In China, the Qin dynasty has just unified the country for the first time. In India, the Maurya Empire is at its peak. And in what is now the state of Ohio, something extraordinary is beginning. A culture that archaeologists call the Hopewell, though that name would have meant nothing to them, is starting to build. Not houses, not simple earthen mounds for their dead, though they would build those too. They are beginning to construct something that the world has never seen before and has never seen since. A network of geometric earthworks, circles, squares, and octagons, spread across hundreds of square miles of landscape, connected by arrow-straight roads, aligned with impossible precision to the movements of the moon. A city-scale sacred landscape, built by hand, without metal tools, without the wheel, without horses. Just human labor, human ingenuity, and a knowledge of astronomy and geometry that is still, 2,000 years later, astonishing professional researchers. Let me give you a sense of the scale. The Newark Earthworks, just one of dozens of major Hopewell sites in Ohio, once covered 4 square miles of land. 4 square miles. That is larger than the entire ancient city of Rome at its peak. The Great Circle alone, one component of the Newark complex, is 1,200 feet in diameter, with walls that once stood 14 feet high. Inside that circle, you could fit 4 Roman colosseums. And the Octagon, the most remarkable structure of all, covers 50 acres, with walls stretching for miles, precisely encoding the movements of the moon across an 18.6-year astronomical cycle. These are not primitive earthworks built by a simple hunter-gatherer society. These are the monuments of a civilization that, for reasons we still don't fully understand, chose stone that leaves no record. A civilization that built in earth rather than rock. And a civilization that, perhaps because of that choice, has been almost entirely erased from the story of human history, until now. Before we go deeper into what the Ohio earthworks actually are, I want to start with the one that first captured the world's attention. Because there is one structure in Ohio that, even when you know what it is, even when you understand intellectually that it is an earthen mound built by human hands, still produces a feeling that is difficult to describe. It is called the Great Serpent Mound, and it is unlike anything else on Earth. Located in Adams County, in the southwestern corner of Ohio, the Serpent Mound stretches for 1,348 feet, more than a quarter of a mile, along the edge of a plateau above Brush Creek. It is shaped, unmistakably, like an enormous snake. 7 distinct coils, a tightly wound spiral tail, and at the head, an open mouth, jaws gaping wide, appearing to swallow or hold something oval-shaped that archaeologists still debate. From the ground, you see rolling earthen curves about 3 feet high. You sense you are walking along something large, but the full picture escapes you. From the air, and this is deliberate, this is the point, The serpent reveals itself in its full, breathtaking geometry. Who built it? That question has been debated for over a century, and the answer is still not settled. The leading theories point to two different ancient cultures. The Adena people, who inhabited the Ohio Valley from roughly 800 BC to 100 AD, or the Fort Ancient culture, which came later, around 1000 to 1650 AD. Radiocarbon dating has produced results supporting both dates, which has only deepened the mystery. But here is what we know for certain. The Serpent Mound sits on the edge of a meteor crater, an ancient impact scar in the Ohio landscape that is only visible from above or on geological maps. The people who built the Serpent Mound chose this location deliberately. They built the serpent's head pointing precisely toward the summer solstice sunset, and the tail, that tight triple spiral at the other end, aligns with the winter solstice sunrise. This is not coincidence. A computer simulation published in a peer-reviewed archaeology journal calculated the odds of these astronomical alignments occurring by chance, and concluded they are essentially zero. Someone, 2,000 years ago, stood in this river valley in Ohio, looked up at the sky, tracked the movements of the sun across an entire year, and then built a quarter-mile-long earthen serpent that would encode those movements into the landscape permanently. And they built it over a meteor crater. A scar in the earth caused by something falling from the sky. Think about what that tells us about how these people understood the relationship between the earth and the heavens. Now we need to talk about the people responsible for most of what you're about to see. The Hopewell culture. The term itself is an accident of history. It comes from the name of a 19th century Ohio farmer, Mordecai Hopewell, on whose land archaeologists first excavated one of these sites in the 1890s. The people themselves had no such name, or if they did, it has not survived. What we know about them comes almost entirely from what they left in the ground. And what they left in the ground is extraordinary. First, the sheer scale of their construction. The Ohio Hopewell didn't just build earthworks in one location. They built a connected network of ceremonial centers spanning hundreds of miles across southern Ohio, linked by earthen roads that ran arrow straight for distances of 60 miles and more. Archaeologists call these the Hopewell road systems, and their precision, measured using modern GPS, is remarkable. Second, their reach. The materials found inside Hopewell burial mounds tell us that these people were connected to a trade network that spanned the entire continent. Obsidian from Yellowstone, nearly 2,000 miles away, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, alligator teeth from Florida. This is not a local culture. This is a civilization with tentacles extending across North America. Third, their astronomical knowledge. This is perhaps the most startling fact of all, and we're going to spend significant time on it. Because when researchers first began to document the astronomical alignments encoded in Hopewell earthworks, the scientific establishment did not want to believe it. The idea that a pre-contact Native American culture in Ohio could have possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge comparable to what was being developed in ancient Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia at the same time, was difficult for many archaeologists to accept. One senior Ohio archaeologist, when presented with early evidence of the lunar alignments at the Newark Earthworks, reportedly dismissed the findings with the words, "Those people were savages. They couldn't have done this." Those words, preserved in the academic record, tell us more about the biases of 20th century archaeology than they do about the Hopewell people. Because the Hopewell most certainly did do this, and the evidence is now overwhelming. This is where the story gets remarkable. Newark, Ohio, a small city about 40 miles east of Columbus, population around 50,000. There is a Walmart and a Taco Bell and a golf course, and beneath the golf course and surrounding it and extending for miles in every direction is the greatest surviving example of ancient earthwork construction in the world, the Newark Earthworks. Built approximately 2,000 years ago by the Hopewell culture, the Newark complex once covered 4 square miles of landscape with a series of precisely engineered geometric shapes, circles, octagon, squares, all connected to each other by earthen walls. Today, much of the original complex has been destroyed. Farmland plowed through it in the 19th century. Roads and buildings cut across it in the 20th. The golf course, which opened in the 1930s, sits directly on top of one of the most significant components, a fact that has been the subject of ongoing legal and cultural battles for decades. But what remains is still staggering. The Great Circle, a perfectly circular earthwork 1,200 feet in diameter, surrounded by walls that once reached 14 feet high and a moat that once reached 8 feet deep. Standing inside this circle, you feel enclosed by the landscape in a way that is almost architectural, as if the earth itself has become a building. The Octagon Earthworks, 8 sides, each precisely measured, each precisely oriented, 50 acres enclosed within earthen walls, and at the junction between the octagon and a large circle connected to it, a gateway, a specific point in the landscape that functions as an astronomical observation post. And here is where the story becomes extraordinary. In the 1970s, 2 professors at Earlham College in Indiana, Ray Hively, an astrophysicist, and Robert Horn, a philosopher, set out to prove that the supposed astronomical alignments at Newark were not real. They were skeptics. They believed that ancient people had probably built the earthworks for religious or social purposes, and that any astronomical alignments were coincidental, the same kind of coincidental patterns that cause people to see faces in clouds. They were wrong. When Hively and Horn analyzed the geometry of the Octagon earthworks against the astronomical record, they found something that stopped them cold. The 8 sides and 8 vertices of the Newark Octagon align with all 8 key rise and set points of the moon during its full 18.6-year cycle. Not 7 of 8, not 6 of 8, all 8. Every maximum and minimum moonrise, every maximum and minimum moonset. Encoded with sub-degree precision in the walls of a 2,000-year-old earthen octagon in Ohio. Hively and Horn ran the statistical analysis rigorously. They used a Monte Carlo simulation, a computer that randomly generated over 10 billion equilateral octagons and checked how many happened to align with lunar standstill points by chance. Their conclusion: the odds that the Newark Octagon's alignments are accidental are approximately 1 in 40 million. 1 in 40 million. The Hopewell did not stumble onto this geometry. They did not accidentally build a lunar calendar into a 50-acre earthwork. They calculated it. They observed the moon over decades, probably generations, tracked its 18.6-year cycle across dozens of standstill events, and then translated that knowledge into the precise geometry of what they built. These are not savages. These are astronomers. I want to pause here and explain something, because the 18.6-year lunar cycle is not something most people know about, and understanding it is key to understanding just how extraordinary the Hopewell achievement actually was. You know about the solar year, 365 days. The Earth goes around the sun, the seasons change, and everything resets. You probably know about the lunar month, roughly 29.5 days. The moon goes through its full cycle of phases, from new moon to full moon and back again. But there is another lunar cycle, one that most people have never heard of, that the Hopewell apparently tracked and understood with extraordinary precision. It is called the lunar standstill cycle, or the major lunar standstill. Here is what it is. The moon, as it moves through the sky, rises and sets at different points on the horizon throughout the year. Some months it rises far to the north. Some months it rises far to the south. And over the course of 18.6 years, the extreme points of these risings and settings, what astronomers call the lunar standstills, slowly shift across the horizon and return to their original positions. It is an 18.6-year cycle that produces 8 specific astronomical events, 4 extreme moonrises and 4 extreme moonsets, marking the absolute northern and southern limits of the moon's movement across the horizon. To observe this cycle once, you need to watch the moon carefully for nearly 20 years. To understand it well enough to encode it into precise geometry, you need to observe it across multiple cycles, 60, 70, perhaps 100 years of systematic astronomical observation. The Hopewell did this. and then they built it into the ground. The Newark Octagon is not just a geometric earthwork. It is a working astronomical instrument, a machine for tracking the lunar standstill cycle, built at a scale that requires the entire Ohio landscape to function. When the moon rises at its major northern standstill, the extreme northeastern point of the lunar cycle, it rises precisely over the gateway between the octagon and the connected circle, visible in perfect alignment from observation points within the earthwork. This event happens once every 18.6 years. And for 2,000 years, it happened in alignment with what the Hopewell built. The last major northern standstill occurred in 2006. The next will occur in 2025. If you were standing at the correct point within the Newark Octagon earthworks on a clear night during the lunar standstill, watching the moon rise at its extreme northeastern point, perfectly framed by walls that were built 2 millennia ago to capture precisely this moment, what would you feel? Now here is something that almost no documentary about the Ohio earthworks ever mentions. The Newark earthworks did not exist in isolation. 60 miles to the southwest, in and around the city of Chillicothe, there is another massive complex of Hopewell earthworks, Mound City, High Bank Works, Sape Earthworks, each one enormous, each one precisely geometrically engineered, each one containing its own astronomical alignments. And connecting Newark to Chillicothe, running for 60 miles in a nearly straight line across the Ohio landscape, there was a road, not a path, not a trail through the woods, a road, an engineered earthen corridor, 60 feet wide, bordered by parallel walls, running arrow straight across hills and valleys and streams, connecting the two great ceremonial centers of the Hopewell world. Archaeologists call it the Hopewell Road, or sometimes the Great Hopewell Road. And when researchers mapped it using modern GPS and LiDAR technology, a remote sensing system that can detect ancient earthworks hidden beneath vegetation and soil, what they found stopped them. The road is not just straight, it is precisely straight. Precision that, over 60 miles of varied terrain, requires sophisticated surveying knowledge to achieve. How did the Hopewell measure 60 miles of straight line across a landscape with no flat ground, no clear sightlines, no GPS? We don't know. Some researchers have proposed that they used astronomical sighting points, aligning their road with specific star risings, just as they align their earthworks with lunar standstills. Others have suggested they may have had surveying instruments we haven't identified. Others simply note that somehow they did it and leave the explanation open. What we do know is that this road, this 60-mile earthen highway connecting two major ceremonial centers, was not built for everyday travel. The Hopewell had a complex social system. Different communities across a wide region were connected to a shared ceremonial world, gathering at sites like Newark and Chillicothe for ritual events, trade, and what some researchers describe as a form of structured peace. The road may have been the physical embodiment of that connection, a sacred path, a way of saying, we are part of the same thing. And then, around 500 AD, it stopped. The Hopewell culture, with its massive earthworks, its continent-spanning trade network, its sophisticated astronomical knowledge, its road systems simply ended. No invasion, no major climate event that archaeologists can definitively identify, no catastrophic plague visible in the archaeological record. They stopped building. They stopped trading. The far-flung network of Hopewell communities across the continent collapsed. And the Ohio heartland, where the greatest earthworks had been built, was slowly abandoned. Archaeologists call this the Hopewell collapse or the end of the Hopewell interaction sphere. They have been debating its causes for decades. Some theories, a major drought, a shift in agricultural productivity, a collapse of the trade networks that held the Hopewell world together. An internal social crisis, perhaps the specialized religious or political elite who organized the earthwork building lost their authority or their funding. Others point to something more subtle. The Hopewell were not a single unified civilization. They were a network of related cultures that shared practices, beliefs, and trade routes. When those shared connections weakened, each community may have simply turned inward, and the grand ceremonial landscape that had required all of them working together was no longer maintained. Whatever happened, the Ohio landscape fell silent. The earthworks remained. Grass grew over them. Trees took root in them. The people who came after, different cultures, different ways of life, walked past them, lived among them, and in many cases had no memory of who built them or why. When European settlers arrived in Ohio in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found a landscape scattered with enormous earthen walls and mounds that the Native American peoples then living in the region could not explain. The knowledge of what the Hopewell had built had been lost even before Columbus landed. Now I need to tell you something that should make you angry. Of the dozens of major Hopewell earthwork complexes that once existed in Ohio, most are gone, not damaged, not partially preserved. Gone. When Ohio was settled by European Americans in the 19th century, the earthworks were in the way. Farmers plowed through them. Cities were built on top of them. Railroads cut across them. The Circleville earthworks, a complex of circles and squares that once rivaled Newark in size, were systematically demolished between 1810 and 1840 to make way for the growing town of Circleville. Property by property, the ancient walls were leveled. Today there is almost nothing left. The Portsmouth earthworks, another massive complex in southern Ohio, were similarly destroyed. What was once a ceremonial landscape covering miles of ground is now a neighborhood with streets and houses laid out across what was once one of the great sacred sites of the ancient world. At Newark itself, a 19th century land developer bought part of the earthworks specifically to build a racetrack inside the Great Circle. Horse races were held inside one of the most significant ancient monuments in the Americas for decades before the site was finally protected. And the Octagon, the lunar observatory, became a golf course in the 1930s. The Mound Builders Country Club operates there to this day, though an ongoing legal effort by the Ohio History Connection to reclaim the land for public access has been slowly making progress. Think about what this means. For comparison, imagine if, in 1850, someone had bought the land around Stonehenge, plowed it up for farmland, and used the stones for building material. Imagine the outcry that would have produced. That is essentially what happened to most of Ohio's ancient earthworks. And it happened with almost no resistance, because the culture that built them, the Hopewell, had disappeared 1,500 years before, and the people who might have advocated for their preservation had been displaced, dispossessed, and marginalized by the same forces of westward expansion that were destroying the sites. The story of what was lost at Ohio is not just an archaeological tragedy. It is a reflection of what happens when a civilization is erased, not just from the landscape, but from the cultural memory of the people who come after. But here is the thing about the Hopewell: they built for permanence. Even what remains, a fraction of what once existed, is enough to tell the story. And in the last 50 years, that story has been getting louder. In 1982, Hively and Horn published their findings about the lunar alignments at Newark. The archaeological establishment was skeptical. Some colleagues refused to believe it, but the evidence was too strong to dismiss. Other researchers replicated the work. New analysis using modern computational tools confirmed the alignments. And in 2006, when the moon rose at its major northern lunar standstill and observers gathered at the Newark Earthworks to watch it rise precisely in alignment with what the Hopewell had built, the debate, at least among serious researchers, was largely over. In 2023, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks of Ohio were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of only 24 sites in the United States to receive that designation. Joining the Grand Canyon, joining Yellowstone, joining Independence Hall, this recognition has changed the conversation. The Hopewell Earthworks are now, officially, a global heritage, a monument to human achievement at the level of the pyramids of Giza, the Roman Colosseum, or the Great Wall of China. But unlike those sites, most Americans have never heard of them. A 2024 survey found that fewer than 12% of Americans could identify the Hopewell culture by name. A civilization that built monuments larger than ancient Rome, that understood the motion of the moon with professional astronomical precision, that connected a trade network spanning the entire North American continent, is essentially unknown in the country where it flourished. Why? Part of the answer is the physical destruction of the sites. When the earthworks are gone, the evidence for the civilization is gone. Part of the answer is the bias that Hively and Horn's skeptical colleague expressed so bluntly, the assumption that pre-contact Native American cultures were primitive and therefore could not have achieved what the evidence shows they achieved. And part of the answer is simply, we don't know how to fit them into the story we tell about the ancient world. The Hopewell don't fit the narrative. They're not in the Bible. They're not in Greek or Roman histories. They're not connected to the civilizations we consider the foundations of Western culture, so they get left out. But the earthworks are still there, and they're still pointing at the moon. I want to end with a question. The Hopewell built the Newark Earthworks to track the 18.6-year lunar cycle. We know this now. The math is confirmed. The statistical evidence is overwhelming. But why? Why does it matter when the moon rises at its northernmost point? Why build a 50-acre lunar observatory and a quarter-mile-long serpent aligned to the sun? Why construct a 60-mile road connecting two ceremonial centers across an Ohio landscape? What were they trying to do? Honest answer is, we don't know, not entirely, but we can make some observations. Every major ancient civilization we have studied, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, India, China, the Maya, placed enormous importance on astronomical observation. The movements of the sun and moon were not merely scientific curiosities. They were understood as the language of the cosmos, the way the universe communicated with the people living in it. The rising of a particular star meant it was time to. The position of the moon determined the timing of festivals. The solstices and equinoxes marked the boundaries between seasons, between sacred and ordinary time. And the lunar standstill, that 18.6-year cycle that the Hopewell encoded in their greatest earthworks, is not a random astronomical event. It is the longest repeating cycle visible to the naked eye in the night sky, the outermost boundary of the moon's movement. The point at which the moon stands still, or appears to, before reversing its path. For a culture that understood the sky as a living, meaningful system, the major lunar standstill would have been the most significant astronomical event in a generation. A moment when the universe paused, when the boundary between ordinary time and cosmic time was thinnest, and the Hopewell built a machine to observe it. A machine made of earth, large enough to contain 4 Roman colosseums, aligned to within a fraction of a degree, designed to last for thousands of years. They built it to be there when the moment came. They built it so that whoever stood within its walls, whenever the moon rose at its extremity, would know this moment matters. This moment was anticipated. This moment was planned for. This moment connects you to everyone who stood here before you in this same landscape, watching this same sky. One last thing, the head of the Great Serpent Mound, the open jaws wrapped around that oval shape. What is it holding? Researchers have proposed many answers. An egg, representing creation, birth, new life. The sun, the serpent swallowing or releasing the sun at the solstice. A frog, a symbol found in other Adena and Fort ancient iconography. But some researchers have proposed something else. The oval shape in the serpent's mouth, they suggest, represents the moon. Specifically the full moon at its major standstill, the largest, highest moon visible from that latitude, rising at its extreme northeastern point over the Ohio horizon. If they're right, the Great Serpent Mound and the Newark Octagon are not separate monuments. They are part of the same system, a landscape-scale astronomical instrument spread across southwestern Ohio, designed to encode the same message in 2 different forms: the serpent, the octagon, the road between them. All pointing at the same thing, the moon. The question I keep coming back to is this: what else did the Hopewell know that we haven't figured out yet? Most of their earthworks are gone. Most of their knowledge, the oral traditions, the ceremonies, the explanations for what was built and why disappeared with the culture itself 15 centuries ago. What we have left are the earthworks that survived, and the sky they were built to observe. The moon still rises at its standstill every 18.6 years. The serpent still points at the summer solstice sunset. The Octagon's gateway still frames the moonrise that the Hopewell encoded in stone. The monument is still working. We just have to learn again how to read it. My name is Paul. This is Mr. Origins. The story of the Ohio Hopewell is a story about knowledge, about what happens when knowledge is lost, through cultural collapse, through deliberate erasure, through simple neglect, and about what happens when knowledge is found again. It's happening now. Researchers are finding more every year. LIDAR surveys are revealing earthworks that were invisible for centuries, hidden under centuries of vegetation and soil. The picture of what the Hopewell built is getting bigger, not smaller. Subscribe to Mr. Origins so you're here when the next piece of the puzzle falls into place. Because the ancient world is not finished revealing itself, not by a long way.